Sunglasses weren't invented for the sun. For most of their history, tinted lenses had almost nothing to do with sunlight and everything to do with power, secrecy, and survival. Start in the Arctic, thousands of years before glass lenses existed at all. Inuit hunters carved narrow slits into bone, ivory, or driftwood and wore them strapped across the face like goggles. The slit let in almost no light, which sounds backwards until you understand the actual danger. Snow blindness is a genuine sunburn of the cornea, caused by ultraviolet light bouncing endlessly off white ice and snow. The goggles didn't tint anything. They didn't need to. Simple physics narrowed the field of light down to a sliver, and versions of this design were still being carved and worn well into the 20th century. Around the same era, the Roman historian Pliny the Elder claimed that the Emperor Nero liked to watch gladiator fights through a polished emerald. Historians still argue whether Nero was correcting nearsightedness, cutting glare, or just showing off an absurdly expensive gemstone, and the story may be exaggerated or entirely apocryphal. But it's one of the earliest written hints that someone had connected tinted, polished material to looking at something bright without discomfort. The more solid documented history picks up in 12th century China. Chinese judges began wearing lenses ground from smoky quartz, a naturally dark, smoke-colored crystal. The purpose wasn't glare, it was concealment. A courtroom is a place where a judge's face gets read constantly. For surprise, doubt, sympathy, disgust, and quartz lenses let a judge keep his expression private while questioning witnesses or handing down a verdict, so no flicker of reaction could tip off a suspect. It's a strange, quiet origin for an object we now associate with beaches and convertibles. Eyewear invented so that other people couldn't read your face. Europe came to tinted lenses through a different door, glassmaking. By the 15th century, Venice was the center of European glass production, and Venetian craftsmen on the island of Murano were producing colored glass for everything from cathedral windows to drinking vessels. It was a natural leap to grind that colored glass into spectacle lenses, mostly for people who already needed corrective lenses and wanted relief from bright light while reading or working outdoors. These were luxury items, hand-ground and expensive, and stayed that way for centuries. The first real attempt to sell tinted lenses for comfort rather than correction came from an English optician named James Ayscough. In 1752, Ayscough advertised spectacles with lenses tinted blue or green, explicit that the tint wasn't for the sun. He believed, incorrectly, that the color itself could correct certain vision problems. The mechanism he described had little to do with how color actually interacts with the eye. But Ayscough's spectacles were some of the first tinted eyewear sold commercially, marketed as a health product rather than a disguise. That health framing stuck around. 19th century advertisements for tinted spectacles routinely promised relief for what they called weak eyes, vague, unregulated language that could mean anything from genuine light sensitivity to eye strain from reading by candlelight. These were sold in pharmacies and by traveling opticians, still expensive, still not really understood as sun protection the way we think of it today. The object, as we recognize it now, mass-produced and sold for a day at the beach, didn't arrive until 1929. A salesman named Sam Foster set up a stand on the Atlantic City boardwalk and began selling inexpensive sunglasses for around $1 apiece to sunbathers. Foster's company, Foster Grant, had figured out how to mold plastic frames and lenses cheaply, so sunglasses could finally be sold to ordinary vacationers instead of just the wealthy. Within a few years, factories were mass-producing them, by the millions, a genuinely industrial transformation of what had been a handcrafted luxury good for 400 years. The next leap came from the military. By the mid-1930s, pilots flying at high altitude faced a real problem. Intense glare above the clouds was causing headaches, nausea, and temporary blindness strong enough to threaten flight safety. In 1936, the U.S. Army Air Corps asked Bausch and Lomb to design something better than the heavy flying goggles pilots had been using. The result was a lightweight, gold-framed lens shaped to cover the entire eye socket and cut glare without distorting depth perception. It went on sale to the public in 1937 under a name that described exactly what it did: Ray-Ban, because it banned the rays. The aviator shape pilots wore into combat during the Second World War is, essentially unchanged, still one of the best-selling sunglass shapes on Earth. Glare science advanced alongside the military application. In 1936, the American inventor Edwin Land, who would later found Polaroid, patented a synthetic polarizing filter, manufactured cheaply as a thin sheet of plastic. Polarized lenses block horizontally scattered light, the kind that causes intense glare off water, snow, and pavement, in a way ordinary tinted glass couldn't. It took decades to become standard and affordable, but Land's 1936 patent is the technical foundation underneath most premium sunglasses sold today. By the post-war years, sunglasses had fully crossed over from military and medical equipment into ordinary American life. Plastic frames were cheap, cars had wide windshields that made glare a daily annoyance, and a habit that started with pilots and boardwalk vendors settled comfortably into millions of households as an unremarkable summer accessory. Hollywood gave sunglasses their second purpose: disguise. Studio photos from the 1940s and 50s show stars wearing large, dark glasses constantly, not for glare. Sunglasses hid bloodshot eyes, obscured faces from photographers, and became visual shorthand for celebrity itself. Women's fashion ran with the glamour angle hardest in the 1950s, when cat-eye frames, upswept at the outer corners, defined the decade. In 1952, Ray-Ban designer Raymond Steigerman introduced a different shape for a younger, more casual market: a thick plastic frame known as the Wayfarer. Sunglasses kept riding pop culture's biggest moments after that. Audrey Hepburn's oversized frames in 1961's Breakfast at Tiffany's turned sunglasses into a symbol of urban sophistication. Designer labels discovered the category in the 1970s and 80s, slapping logos on frames and turning a $5 drugstore item into a status symbol. And when Tom Cruise wore aviators throughout 1986's Top Gun, Ray-Ban's sales of that exact style reportedly jumped by tens of percent almost overnight, nearly 50 years after the shape was designed for Army pilots in the first place. Today's sunglasses industry is dominated by a handful of enormous companies, built on the recipe Sam Foster stumbled onto on the boardwalk: cheap materials, mass production, and a design people want to be seen wearing. But the engineering has kept improving quietly. Modern lenses carry UV 400 ratings that block nearly all ultraviolet light, a real safeguard against cataracts and eye damage that nobody selling quartz to Chinese judges or blue glass to Georgian Englishmen could have understood. What started as a hunter's slit against snow blindness, a judge's mask against scrutiny, and a pilot's shield against glare ended up as one of the most ordinary objects on Earth, doing a job that took nearly 1,000 years to figure out. Follow for the next object.